is Lord of all. We're going to start out today. I'm going to tell you a story about my dog. And the story is going to go on for a little while. You're going to be sitting at home going, I thought we were studying the Bible. Why is Pastor Isaac telling me a story about his dog? Is he just bored? No. There's a point to this story, and we are going to use this story, the worldview and the perspective of my dog, to understand some of the most difficult and weird parts of the Bible. Today we're going to be jumping into the second half of the book of Daniel, which is visions of the end of the world. All right, so my dog. So let's get a picture of my dog up here. This is Bella, and this is a picture of Bella. Everybody say, aw. Oh, that Bella, this is last summer. She was still a puppy. She's a little bit older now. She's still a puppy, but maybe just at the end of a puppy. She's probably fully grown physically now. She's a border collie. Bella is amazing. She's still learning lots of things about how to interact with the human world. She doesn't get it all the time. This picture, Bella is in the creek at Watershed Park. Some of you may know that particular spot. Actually, Watershed Park is here. It's in the city of Delta, just across Scott Road from where we're at here in Surrey. And this is a place that I go to quite often. I love Watershed Park. If you don't know it, it's a bunch of trails in the woods. It's a park, but there's no playground. There's one area that's kind of a field that's open. But anyway, so what I'm going to tell you about is what it's like, the different things Bella does as we go for a run in the woods in Watershed Park. So number one, I come downstairs dressed in my clothes, getting ready to run. I have blue shoes that I run in, and so she recognizes those shoes very quickly. And when she does, she's super excited. She cannot control herself. She's jumping all over the place, jumping all over me. She scratches me. Now, she doesn't mean to scratch me. She's not mad at me for taking her for a run. She's super excited, but she can't control herself. I put the leash on her, take her to the door, and she immediately starts trying to pull me out the door. Now, we live on a medium busy road. The most dangerous thing in Bella's life is crossing the road. But Bella doesn't know that. Bella doesn't really see any difference yet, not much anyway, between the road and our yard. And so she just wants to run straight across it. So I must restrain her. I'm sure she doesn't understand fully. Why? He gets me all excited, takes me out here, and then he pulls me back immediately. Why can't we just go? She doesn't understand why. So the cars go by. We're training her to stop and sit before she crosses the road when we tell her to cross the road. So we get across the road. Then we go down. We get to the park. As soon as she gets into the park, she is totally distracted. What world is she in at that point? She's in the woods now, and what is important to her? She smells everything. She wants to sniff out the bugs that are underneath rocks. She wants to smell every tree because other dogs have peed on that tree. And that's very interesting to her. She hears sounds, and she hears squirrels and little birds going through the trees. Oh, that is the most important thing to her. I pull her back to stay on the trail. She cannot understand why. She must think I'm crazy. Why would I not want to smell the pea tree and go after the birds? That's the best. Okay, we continue. She finally understands we got to stay on the trail. All right, we're running together. Now, I told you Bella is not afraid enough of the road, but she is too afraid of other things that we run into in the park, in particular, people with dogs. If we encounter Bella's a COVID puppy, right? So she hasn't actually spent a lot of time around other dogs. So when she encounters another dog in the forest, oh my goodness, that is the scariest thing in the world to her, even if the dog is half her size. It's pretty funny. She's totally terrified. She's trying to get away, hide behind me. This little yippy dog is, I mean, she could bite the dog in half in one, anyway. But she's afraid. She's too afraid of other people and dogs. She doesn't know what I know, that these dogs all have owners with them, that most of these dogs are well trained, older than her. She doesn't understand all of these things, that really those dogs pose almost no threat to her. She thinks the cars are not scary, even though those could kill her in 1 second or less than a second. The dogs, which are not really a threat to her, she's terrified of. She doesn't effectively understand how to deal with, well, really the human environment that she's in. She only understands the dog environment, the animal environment that she's in. If she were in the wild, of course, meeting a wild animal, it would be true that that is a great danger to her, right? So that's all she sees. Her instincts tell her. All right, now we go through the park. The last piece I'll tell you is that when we get home, I always take Bella over to the side of our house and I spray her off with the hose so she's nice and clean when we go back inside. Now, this is something that Bella cannot possibly understand why I would do it. I mean, think about this from her perspective. I've just taken her on one of the greatest things in her life, which is to go for a run in the woods. An amazing moment. She's so in love with me over taking her for a run. This is wonderful. And then when I bring her home, I take her over to the torture chamber and spray her down with cold water, which is her worst thing. It probably is the worst thing in her life, in her mind. And in her world, the dog's world, there is no reason for it. Dogs don't care if they're dirty, if they smell, whatever. There's no reason within the dog world for her to take a bath. The only reason for it is so that she can more effectively interact with human beings. If she is not clean, my family, especially my wife, will not be very happy about that. They won't want to be around her. They won't want to cuddle with her. She doesn't understand that. The bath is helpful to her, but it's helpful for a realm or a human world that she doesn't understand. Okay, that's Bella. That's the Bella story. Let's take it a little bit deeper and start to think about what world is Bella in. Think about this fact. When Bella and I are in the park, we're in the woods, we are in the same physical space. Would you agree? Everybody say, yeah, same physical space. We're on the same trail. Okay, we're not standing on top of each other. We're in the same place. But we are in different realities. The place that Bella is in her mind, is this place of animals. It's the bugs. It's the smells. It's what she knows, how to interact with a dog, be scared of a wild animal. She sees the trail right in front of her. I, in my mind, as a human being, am in a whole different reality. We could think of it as a different realm. I am in the human realm, though we are in the same physical space. I know things that she can't possibly know. The place that we're in, the forest, just looks to her like a place that's just always been there. I know it's created and maintained by human beings. The trees aren't created. Those are created by God. But the forest is allowed to be there through human planning, through human laws and regulations. I know about layers of authority that sit on top of that park. I know what a park is. She has no idea. She has no idea she's in a park. I know that there are police that make sure that there's no bad people that come into that park and do bad stuff and wreck it. I know that there's firefighters in that park all the time maintaining trails and making sure that the park doesn't burn down. I know that the city of Delta is there making sure things are okay. I know all kinds of things that she doesn't know. We are walking in the same physical space, but in totally different realities. And that's why I'm able to interact with it more effectively than her. Because think about this, the reality that she's living in is completely at the mercy of the higher human realm. If the human realm decided to burn down or cut down Watershed Park, it would be destroyed. There's nothing that the animal realm could do to save it. All right. Now here we go. Let's start to apply it to the Bible. We are going to see in today's passage that Daniel is seeing visions of a different realm, a spiritual realm. Isn't it crazy Isn't it kind of weird and way old-fashioned to believe that there's things that we can't see? Come on, that can't be real, right? Spirits, a spiritual realm, heaven, that can't be real. All that's real is what I see, right? Isn't that the same thing dogs would say to each other about the human realm if they could talk and have that conversation? Oh, come on, Cocker Spaniel. Don't try to tell me that, there's some invisible human people who I never see who take care of this park. No, that's ridiculous. I never see them, but they're walking around protecting us. Oh, that's ludicrous. Don't try to tell me that there's dangers that I've never even heard of. The dogs would think the same thing about the human realm. Make no mistake, there is a spiritual realm, a different reality, and you are walking around right now at the mercy of it. It is right here occupying the same physical space as we are right now. But all you see is the human realm, at least for the most part. The dogs sometimes get a glimpse of the human realm in different ways, and they don't fully understand it. Same for us with the spiritual realm. We sometimes get a glimpse of the spiritual realm. We can understand some things about it, but we don't see it most of the time. And we cannot fully understand it, not right now. Someday we will. Someday we will. We can, however, learn to interact with it. Bella, my dog, is capable of learning to interact with the human realm. How? By being trained by me, her owner, or by my son, who's supposed to be doing the training. Get to work. She's capable of learning many things about how to interact. Don't run into the street. She can learn that as she gets older. Cars are to be respected. She can never fully understand what a car is, but she can learn to stay out of its way. She can also learn that the dogs in the park are not a threat to her and that a bath is a good thing because it makes her life better in the long run, even if she doesn't fully understand why. The same thing is true of us with God. Let me read for you. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I want you to keep these different realms in mind as I read this. Actually, if we have it on the screen, let's pull it up. Do we have 1 Corinthians chapter 2? Here we go. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 2, starting at verse 9. As it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no human mind has conceived. It's beyond us. The things that God has prepared for those who love him. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. Next. For who knows a person's thoughts except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. What we have received is not the spirit. What we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. This is what we speak, not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. The person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, but such a person is not subject to merely human judgments. For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. We're not going to go through that passage in detail, but I think you can see, even on a first reading, a little bit of what Paul is telling us. Just like Bella can learn from a human master, God has given us his Spirit to teach us about a realm that is above us, to draw us more and more into that realm so that we live in a way that is more effective. Because the truth is, our human realm is always, all the time, at the mercy of that spiritual realm. If we can't deal with it effectively, we are in big trouble. It's almost like what we saw in there, those who don't have the Spirit cannot possibly understand this realm. They think it's foolishness. And don't so many people in our world think that the idea that there's a spiritual world is foolish? They do, but they are wrong. They are mistaken. It's because they have not received the Spirit of God. Think about how a wild animal would react if they could have a conversation with a domesticated dog. Why do you stop for that road? That's ridiculous. There's nothing there. You stopped for nothing. Why aren't you afraid of that wild animal you ran into the park? Oh, because your master, some human who I can't see, told you to not be afraid? They would think that the domesticated animal is foolish. But the domesticated animal knows reality better than the wild animal because they've learned it from their master. All right. So we're going to start talking about the end of the world. We're going to do it this week and next week. Then we're going to take a break, jump back to 1 Peter. I think because we can't take all of this end of the world stuff all in a row. It's going to be pretty weird. And I can't take it all in a row. It takes a lot of work to prepare these messages in particular. So we're going to do 2 weeks, then we'll take a little break, go to 1 Peter, then we'll come back to Daniel after that and do more crazy end of the world stuff. So before we jump, one more thing before we jump into Daniel 7 and see all the weird stuff today. Let's bring out a couple of points, a couple of principles to help us as we study the end of the world. First of all, the spiritual realm is so above us and so incredibly powerful that often when people look at it, when they experience it in some small way or have a vision or even just look at it in the Bible, they kind of go crazy. Kind of like my dog when I come down with my blue shoes on and she goes nuts and can't control ourselves. Sometimes people have predicted crazy things about the end of the world. Sometimes people have gotten way too involved in trying to predict all the particular things. What's going to happen in the end times? Let me write out every future event that's going to happen and tell you the day Jesus is going to return. Don't try to do that. The Bible says you can't. Just like Bella can only understand some things about the future, about the human realm. Sorry, not the future. She can only understand some things about the human realm. We can only understand some things about the spiritual realm and the visions of the future that are given in the Bible. So don't try to pin it all down or say when Jesus is returning. I'll give you a couple of crazy examples. In the 200s, there was this guy named, let's bring his statue up here. This dude, his name was Montanus, and he was a Christian pastor, priest in the 200s in what is modern-day Turkey. And he started having visions from God, and these visions made him so crazy. Maybe they were from God, maybe some other spiritual force, I don't know. But they made him so crazy that he said, Jesus is returning. He's going to return next year. And he said he's not going to return in Jerusalem, which is what the Bible says. Don't ever contradict the Bible. That's not a good idea. And he said he's not going to return in Jerusalem. He's going to return in that field over there. A field near where they lived in Turkey. And so he got thousands of people to go out and live in this field and wait for the return of Jesus. And it didn't happen when he said, and it was a big disaster. It was a big catastrophe. And everybody had to go home disappointed. Don't be like Montanus. Sometimes not only have religious leaders predicted the end of the world, but you'll notice in our modern culture, science has predicted the end of the world in many ways, many times. And so far, just like religious leaders, science has always been wrong so far. One of these you might not know about is pretty interesting. In 1910, there was a big panic because Halley's Comet was coming near, and everybody thought it was going to kill all life on Earth. So what happened was that a French scientist was using a new astronomical technique to study Halley's Comet. And using that technique, he determined, I don't actually know if this is true or not, but he thought Halley's Comet's tail was full of cyanide gas. And so he went to the newspapers and he told the whole world, it was published all over the world, that when it passed near the Earth, it was going to infect our atmosphere with cyanide and kill everybody. And so there was panic in the streets. People were buying up all the food, stockpiling. People were buying like gas masks, whatever they had at that time that they could try to avoid death from Halley's Comet. Of course, Halley's Comet didn't do anything. We just saw it and it flew by. So don't be like that. More recently, in the 90s and early 2000s, a man named Harold Camping predicted the date of the return of Jesus and the end of the world 12 different times. That's right, 12 times he said, on this day at this time, Jesus is going to return. And each time when he was wrong, he said, sorry, I just calculated it wrong. I'll get it right this time. And he told us again when it would be. Every time, of course, he was wrong. So the point is this: study the end of the world, but don't go crazy. Study the end. Let's put that point on the screen. Study the end, but don't go crazy. Not that one. Study the end, but don't go crazy. Well, you can write it down. There we go. Study the end, but don't go crazy. Second point that will help us know how to think as we look at these visions of the end. To get at this point, I'll use an illustration that comes from a man named Stephen Covey in a book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Excellent book, well beyond its title would suggest. In this book, Stephen Covey recommends that in order to better understand our priorities, we would do this. He recommends you take half a day or a whole day, get yourself very quiet and focused, and go through in your imagination, really picture before you your own funeral. Does that sound kind of morbid? Well, your own funeral is coming one of these days. So he encourages us to picture your own funeral. Imagine what it's like, the smell of the flowers, the music that's going on. Really immerse yourself in your imagination into that moment. And he encourages us to picture that moment as only 3 years from today. And to think about, if we died in 3 years, who would be there at my funeral? What would they say? What would my parents or my children say? What would my spouse say? What would my friends say? Think of particular people. What would I want them to say? Now, the point of this exercise, and I will say this is true. If you do it, this is a very powerful exercise. I've done it a couple of times. If you do this, what it will do is it will dramatically clarify your own priorities. You will suddenly realize in that moment what things are really important to you and what things are just the busyness of life and don't actually matter that much. Things like how much money you had, if you were successful at certain things, all those things will kind of drop away if you really picture yourself at your own funeral, because it's over. It will become very clear that what's important to you is relationships, love, what kind of person you really were. Anyway, it's a great exercise. But the point is this: the reason you would do that exercise is to clarify your priorities. And the same is true of studying the Bible and its predictions of the end of the world. We study the end in order to set our priorities, to get our priorities right. Let's bring that slide up. Study the end to get our priorities right. Remember last week, if you were there, you can go back and watch it online if you weren't. We talked about Daniel in the lion's den. Here was a guy who was able to face the greatest rulers of the age and to be thrown into a den of ravenous lions without any fear. How in the world is that possible? Okay, he trusted God, but I try to trust God too, and I'm still afraid of lots of stuff that happens in my life. How did Daniel get to the place where he was unafraid of death right in front of him? Part of how he got there. We talked last week about all his regular disciplines and practices, things that he did that were actually much like Bella taking a bath. Things that don't primarily have their effect in the human realm, but in the spiritual realm. He did those things regularly. But also, God gave him visions. God gave him a picture, we're about to see in chapter 7, of what the end of the world was going to look like, what the future would look like from God's perspective. And once that sank down deep into him, he was like a well-trained dog in Watershed Park. Okay, I'm not saying Daniel was a dog. Don't take me the wrong way. But like a well-trained dog would not be afraid of the things other dogs in the park. Like a well-trained dog would know the right things to be afraid of, cars, to stop in the right place, would trust their master. This is how Daniel became, because he had been shown the end And this is the point of studying it, not to figure out every detail of, we're never going to understand every detail, not in this life, but we can understand the big stuff. All right, here we go. You ready? Daniel chapter 7, the crazy stuff that's coming up. Daniel's vision. We'll read it, then we'll talk about it. This is going to be a to be continued message. We're going to spend 2 weeks just on this one chapter. So today we'll paint the picture of the vision he saw. We'll talk a little bit about what it means. Next week we're going to talk more about some big ideas. The beasts that come out of the chaotic sea. The Antichrist. The Son of Man. Here we go. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, so this is about 15 years before the story of the lion's den that we did last week. Daniel is maybe in his mid-60s. Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. So the rest of this is in Daniel's own words, his own writings. Daniel said, "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human being was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful." Notice he repeats himself here, terrifying and frightening. Why does he have to say it twice? Daniel is scared to the max by this beast when he sees it. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and it trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the other beasts that he had seen, and it had 10 horns. What did this thing even look like? Daniel cannot even come up with an animal to pin to this beast. This is a monster. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. It's like, getting a grown-up tooth. When you have a baby tooth, it pushes out the other horns. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being. Yeah, the horn had eyes. That's right. That's what he's saying. And it had a mouth that spoke boastfully. At the end of this vision, we'll pause there, but at the end of the chapter, in verse 28, which we'll get to next week, after Daniel's seen all of this, and you'll see next week he actually speaks with some spiritual beings about this, angels. At the end of it, he says he's overwhelmed. He's terrified. His mind is troubled, and he can't even deal with this vision. He simply writes it down and puts it away and tells no one about it. The vision, in fact, doesn't come out, I think, until after Daniel's death, when other people who knew him find all of his writings and realize what this great man has seen. All right. So all we're going to do for the rest of the message is just talk about this vision, say a little bit about what it means. We're not going to try to pin everything down because we can't. We're not going to try and say, what is a car? How does the whole engine work? We're just going to say, stay off the road. Here, the big pieces here. We're going to try to identify some of it, and then we'll come back to it next week. All right. So first of all, you remember, if you do, Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, there was another vision. This was way earlier, like 40 years before, maybe 50 years before. Daniel was with King Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, had a dream. You remember this? And in the dream, he didn't tell anybody about it. Daniel told him what the dream was, because it was revealed to Daniel by God. This is how Daniel got his start with King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has seen this huge statue in his dream, and the statue was of a human being, a king, a great king. And it had a head of gold, and it had a chest, an upper torso of silver, and then bronze, and then iron mixed with clay. And in that, after that, there was a rock that was cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. And the rock destroyed the whole statue and began a whole new kind of kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar said, "What does this dream mean?" And Daniel told him what it meant. It was a prediction of the future. 4 kingdoms that would come. First, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the kingdom of gold. Then come the Persians, which when we get to the Daniel in the lion's den, which we did last week, it's actually the Persian kingdom has begun. And then the Greeks came and took over for about 300 years, and then the Romans come, and during the time of the Romans, the new kingdom, the kingdom of God, would begin to destroy the kingdoms of the earth. That is, Jesus, the Messiah, would come during the kingdom of the Romans. What's happening here in this vision in chapter 7 is God is giving Daniel a new vision, a very different picture, but it is a picture of the same reality. Notice that when it was viewed from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, from the perspective of a human being, the kingdoms that would come in the future looked like an amazing human being, a great king in all his splendor and wonder and power. When it's viewed from the spiritual realm, from God's perspective given to Daniel, those kingdoms look like beasts. They look like animals. And in fact, they look like deformed animals or mutated animals. And one of them looks like a demonic monster. What things look like from the spiritual realm is very different than what they look like from the human realm. Who's right? Well, God's right. Let's talk about the beast now. The first one is a lion. This one isn't too scary. It's nighttime. Maybe it's a little bit scary. A lion is kind of scary, maybe if you're right up in front of it, but a lion is also majestic. A lion is a beautiful creature to behold. The only weird thing about the lion is that it has the wings of an eagle. What does this mean? The lion, just like the first kingdom in the statue, the lion is Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what Daniel sees as he's watching, okay, the lion has wings, it's powerful. This is just like Nebuchadnezzar. He was the most powerful king of his day. The wings represent speed. Nebuchadnezzar had conquered the world faster than anyone before him. He conquered the whole known world. He was powerful, more powerful than all the other animals. But as we're watching, his wings are ripped off. Do you remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? God pursued him. And actually, as we saw in our series of messages so far, God put him through a lot of pain and suffering, like the wings being torn off of this lion. Why? Just to harm him? No, for his good. He put him through the pain and suffering in order to raise him up. The lion is stood up on its hind feet, pulled up so it's standing like a human being. And then it's given the mind of a man, the mind of a human being. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar at the end of his life? He finally saw that God is real, that the God of Daniel is the one true God of the universe, and he submitted his life to him and was given peace. At the end of his life, he is a man full of peace and love. He has been transformed from a lion running around devouring the world and taking over into a reasonable creature. He's been brought up into the spiritual realm in significant ways. The first beast is Nebuchadnezzar and his empire. We're told later that these beasts are the king as well as the kingdom. They represent both at the same time. The second beast coming up out of the water is a bloodthirsty bear. This one is scarier. This one is the Persian kingdom, the one with Darius that threw people into the lion's den. The bear comes up out of the water, and what do we learn about the bear? Two things. Number one, it says it's raised up on its side. I think that means that the bear is physically deformed. It's a bear, it's a great hulking, terrifying bear, but one side of its body has a physical deformation. It's a mutated bear. It's deformed, it's twisted. It's not according to nature, not fully. And we also learned that the bear has 3 ribs in its mouth. You can imagine its mouth. Now, some of this stuff is gross. This vision is vivid. It's like a horror movie. The bear's mouth has it has flesh in it, dripping with blood. And the bear is bloodthirsty. A voice comes and tells the bear, "Get up and devour." And the bear runs off into the world, attacking, killing, and tearing things into pieces. This is the Persian Empire. You remember how bloodthirsty they were even just in Daniel 7. In Daniel 7, we saw Darius was all mad because his advisors tricked him, right, and made him throw Daniel into the lion's den. So he seems like he's a really nice guy. He loves Daniel, and he did love Daniel. Remember what he did right after Daniel was saved from the lion's den? God saves Daniel. What does Darius do next? All those guys that tricked me, bring them here. Bring their wives, bring their children, throw them all into the pit of lions, and let the lions devour them. To Darius, that was nothing. That was normal, everyday life. A bloodthirsty regime, a bloodthirsty king, the great hulking bear. Now, the next one happens long after Daniel is dead, actually. The next kingdom, the next beast to come up out of the chaotic sea is a leopard. Now, but it's no normal leopard, it's a mutated leopard. That would be the word we would use today. This leopard, number one, it has 4 wings, like the wings of a bird. What do the wings mean? Remember, we said speed. It also has 4 heads. Imagine what this thing looked like to Daniel. It is an abomination. It is still like an animal, but very little like an animal. It's like the most deformed kind of animal you could really think of before it just becomes a monster. What is this creature representing? It is representing Alexander the Great. If you know your history, what happens after the Persians rule for about 250 years is Alexander the Great conquers the world faster than anyone before him, far faster than Nebuchadnezzar had conquered it. In the span of less than 5 years, Alexander the Great conquers all the way from Greece to India. No one had ever done it before. They say he could have gone all the way to China, except that his own soldiers said, "We think the world is going to end if we go any further east, so we must turn home." He conquers the entire known world in an extremely short period of time. He's worshiped as a god while he's on earth. And then he dies in his early 30s, suddenly. When he dies, 4 of his generals, how many heads did the beast have? 4 of his generals take over different parts of his empire and rule them for the next 300 years. This is the leopard. Why is it a leopard? A leopard is kind of like what other animal? A cheetah. Speed, authority to rule. This is the Greek Empire that would come. Finally, a beast comes up out of the water that Daniel cannot even describe. He cannot pin it to an animal. He doesn't try. He says this beast is terrifying and frightening. That's his best description. And it's different. It's just nothing I've ever seen before, this beast. And in fact, if we were going to put it in our terms, I think this beast is like half robot. It's like a cyborg. It has iron teeth. That's very interesting, isn't it? The beast has iron teeth. The iron teeth devour everything. The beast is huge. It's hulking. It devours things with its teeth. Anything that it doesn't rip to shreds with its teeth, it tramples with its huge weight and pounds it into the dirt. The beast also has 10 horns on its head. I don't know what this thing actually looked like, but pretty gross. And then imagine that scene. Daniel says he's thinking about the horns. It's almost like you zoom in on the beast's head. And there's the 10 horns, and it's probably kind of slimy and gross. And think of what this must have looked like to Daniel as one of the horns, a new horn, comes up out of the beast's head and uproots, knocks 3 of the other horns out of the way. And the new horn that comes up has eyes and a human mouth. And what's it doing? As soon as this horn comes up, it's speaking boastful words. The horn comes up all disgusting and gross and saying, I am the greatest. I am God. Everyone will bow to me. No wonder Daniel doesn't even know what to do with this vision. Now, what does the 4th beast represent? That is a great question. We're going to talk more about it as we go forward. The short answer is the beast represents Rome. The 4th kingdom is clearly the Roman Empire, but it is also representing not only Rome, but Rome and the whole rest of the history of the world. The time that we now live in, think about this with me for a minute. The time that we are living in right now, when viewed from the spiritual perspective, from the spiritual realm, it looks like a deformed monster devouring things. That is what our era looks like from God's perspective. What's spoken of next, this little horn, is the first prediction, one of the first predictions in the Bible. There might be a couple references before this, but the first prediction of something that will be talked about a number of times in Scripture, a person who will be talked about, the Antichrist. This person who will come at the end, be full of power and absolutely full of evil. At the end of the passage, we also see, we didn't read it, but here's the good news coming. Not only is the Antichrist coming, but so is someone that Daniel will refer to as the Son of Man. Someone who will be from God, who will destroy the power of evil forever, who will rule, who will have a court seated, who will judge the world. This is an astonishing vision that's given to Daniel. I guess our last point for today, which I want you to walk away with, is this. What are we going to take from this for today? This crazy vision of what the future, what our time is going to be like. One big piece that we can take away from it is this. Things are going to get worse, but God is in control. Things are going to get worse. When things look bad in the news, in our world, when a worldwide pandemic hits, when things get even worse than that, we should not be surprised. Things are going to get worse, but take heart. Have courage. Because God, the Lord Jesus Christ, has already overcome the world. It's all under His authority and control. Come back next week. We're going to watch as Daniel talks with spiritual beings, as he hears what they say this vision means, and as we try to draw more out of this about how we can live our lives better today because we know what the end will be like. Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.